So all eyes on interest rates and inflation all around the world. Let's talk to the distinguished international economist, Vicky Pryce. Vicky, welcome back. Good to see you. So Japan's plan there, the UK and the US holding their interest rates. The European Central Bank also probably going to keep rates on hold. What do you make of it all? Give us the big picture.
Well, what most central bankers are seeing is that the interest rate increases that they have put in place, which were very fast, remember, in the case of the European Central Bank, just over a year when they started raising rates in July 2022 from negative, one of their interest rates was still negative then, they have raised the rates quite significantly. They're still below, of course, by 1 point where we are in the UK and where the US is, but still it's been a very rapid increase in all those places. And that has begun to hurt the economy quite significantly. We've seen, and you had a mention of what happens with the housing sector, mortgages. It becomes very expensive for anyone to remortgage, and therefore people are just not moving. It has some perverse effects. In some cases, the US is seeing house prices going up again because nobody is prepared to sell and remortgage, which is quite interesting in itself. So what I think has happened until now is that the look was all at inflation and how to bring it down. What is beginning to happen now, I think, is a realization that perhaps a lot of that inflation was caused simply by energy prices and food prices being high, and maybe the medicine has been over-administered, and maybe interest rates have risen a bit too fast and too far. So we are in a period of pause, and we are seeing actually some of that inflation coming down. I think that's good news if you're hoping that perhaps interest rates will start coming down earlier than what the central bankers are saying.
Broadly, though, inflation is still a worldwide problem, isn't it? I mean, why is it still so high? And politicians and central bankers always tell us that they control the levers, but realistically, what can governments and central banks really do to get it under control?
It's interesting you say that, but of course, if you look at the Eurozone and what's been happening there, inflation's come down very significantly. It's come down, not too far from target, 2.9% in October. In some countries, it's actually negative. I mean, I almost didn't believe the figures I saw. So the Netherlands had negative inflation in October, if indeed the figures are correct. These are flash estimates for some countries. And if you look also, smaller countries like Greece, 1.6%. If you look at Italy, something similar, a real substantial drop. And that is because, of course, the energy costs, which were there and really troubling the economy until now, have come down. Now, of course, everything can change because you had a discussion earlier about the impact of the war in Ukraine and also, of course, what's happening in the Eastern Mediterranean. So you may well end up with an upward push in inflation at some point. It's not impossible, but for the moment, what we're seeing is that inflation is slowing down. Not so much in the UK yet, but I think the October data is also going to be quite good.
I don't know if you managed to hear our film just before you on Japan. I mean, Japan taking these enormous steps. What is it, $113 billion stimulus package to try and sort inflation there. Is that going to work?
Well, inflation in Japan is around 3%, but of course, they're just as your correspondent was saying, they can't do much on interest rates. Their interest rates are at zero practically, and it really is energy costs that have pushed quite a lot of those prices up in Japan. I think they do need to do something to relieve the pressure on consumers, and I think that's what they're trying to do. But as we heard, they do that periodically. I think it might work up to a point, and I think one of the reasons I think why the economies have been sustained, you mentioned earlier that we're talking about resilience in the UK, is because there has been support for the consumer and for businesses, even though interest rates have been going up, and that support with energy prices in particular has been helpful. It meant that people still had some money to go out and spend, and they have done that. It's really what has kept various economies going. There's a limit to how much you can do that, because of course the public finances have been strained quite significantly because of COVID and now because of the energy cost as well and the help that was needed to be given. So the hope is that perhaps we don't need that very much more in the future. But Japan is a different case. The US is also, the economies, this is the interesting thing, they're all diverging in terms of how they have reacted and how they've been affected by the various crises. The US is very big, self-sufficient in energy. It can do all sorts of things that others cannot do. Europe still split between various countries and too dependent on Russian energy. So all that is leading to slightly different profiles in terms of growth and inflation. So although inflation is coming down, as I said, in Europe, actually the economy is not doing well at all, because we've seen, of course, a drop in GDP in the last quarter in the Eurozone, and we've also seen Germany, the main economy, in recession too.
Vicky, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme again. Vicky Pryce talking to us there in London.